Hello, and welcome back to Moonlit Journal. Today's video is going to be very different from anything that I've shared on my channel before, and if I'm being completely honest, I'm feeling really nervous about it. It's not exactly a comfortable feeling sharing something this personal and this important to me, but I just felt like this was weighing on me and it was something that I wanted to share with my community. I want this to be a place of acceptance and a space where everyone feels valued and heard and safe. Honestly, I want my channel to be a safe space, and I think it starts with me by being authentically myself and being open with you. Not to say that I felt obligated to share this, but April is actually National Autism Acceptance Month, and I felt like it was kind of the best time for me to add to the conversation online. My diagnosis was very, very recent. It was only a few weeks ago. And so, as you can imagine, I'm still processing that. And how I'm feeling today might not be how I feel, a year from now, but I want to be open about how it has impacted my life, the feelings that I'm experiencing, and just share my perspective as someone who is autistic, really for two main reasons. The first one is if it could help anybody, that would mean everything to me, because when I started this process of self-discovery, the thing that helped me the most was seeing content from autistic creators, seeing them talk about their experiences, how they felt internally. It gave me a huge sense of validation and like I wasn't alone, because I think a common shared experience of all autistic people is the feeling of isolation and not belonging. So watching content from other autistic creators really helped me feel a sense of community, feel like I wasn't making things up in my head. It was incredibly validating. And so if I could be that for someone else, that would be incredible. I mean, that's worth all of the anxiety and discomfort that this is causing me. And so if you are someone who suspects you might be autistic or is going through the diagnosis process, or maybe was recently late diagnosed like myself, or if you're anyone who was late diagnosed, I think, or I hope, this video helps you feel less alone. The other reason I'm putting this video out there is because I think the best way to make progress on the amount of misinformation and misconception that there is about autism, the best way to combat that is by more and more autistic people sharing their perspectives and their lived experiences online. And I have been incredibly inspired by so many autistic creators online. It's just so admirable, so incredible to me. And yeah, I wanted to participate as well. So if you're someone that comes to my channel typically for my journaling or stationery content, this week is going to be a little different, and I completely understand if you're not interested in this. That's totally fine, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for being here if you do choose to stay and watch this video. And I hope no matter what your experience is in life and what your circumstances are, I hope that you just feel like this is a safe space for you to be. That's all I really want for my channel. So thank you for being here. And I guess we can start with the process of discovering that I might be autistic. So a couple months ago, I was just browsing YouTube and I saw a video pop up on my Explore page from Dr. Kim Sage, and she was talking about 10 signs in late diagnosed autistic adults. And I was just intrigued. I'm someone that's always been very interested in learning about different human experiences. I'm particularly interested in behavior and psychology, and I actually have my degree in cognitive science. So I often watch videos about, different human conditions And I'm very, very interested in psychology, linguistics, neurology, cognition, all of that. And so it's not uncommon for me to watch videos like that out of my own interest. And as the video was going on, I felt this weight building in my chest. I was almost like bracing myself as I was watching it, because I could relate to every single trait or experience that she explained in that video. There wasn't a single one that didn't apply to me. And it's hard to explain what that felt like. Before that point, I never suspected that I was autistic. It wasn't even on my radar. And that is largely because the information and the stereotypes that have been put out there historically, systemically, about autism looked completely different from what this doctor was explaining in her video. And so my perception of autism was completely wrong. I never felt like I could relate to the traits that were commonly portrayed in social media, in the media, in TV, in movies, anywhere. I think there is a very common narrative put out there that autistic people lack empathy. I could never relate to that because I am an empath and I'm highly sensitive to other people's feelings and experiences, and I'm very compassionate. Another one was that autistic people don't understand social cues. I could never relate to that because I'm highly aware of social cues. And I think in actuality, it's very common for autistic people to be very aware of the right things to do in an interaction, and, you know, how to be considerate of others and polite and kind and friendly, because we are so hyper aware of how one should be interacting with others. So that was another myth that, you know, made me never even wonder if I was autistic. Another one is that autistic people aren't very perceptive or intuitive, which was, again, completely incorrect. I have always been a very, very perceptive and intuitive person. And so throughout my life, I will say I never actually believed any of these misconceptions. I was very aware that, you know, those are huge generalizations and were simply not true representations of autistic people. But I think the reason why I never suspected I could be autistic is because I didn't have the right information either. You know, the common traits and experiences of late diagnosed, high masking autistics, which is what I fall under, were not really shared commonly. You know, it's not common knowledge. So I was never aware of those things. And as a result, I had built a very specific perception of myself my whole life, as we all do, right? For 30 years of my life, my perception of myself was, it had a lot of positives, but there were also a lot of negatives. I have always felt like I am too sensitive. You know, why do things that everyone else seems to be fine with and is coping with perfectly, why do those things bother me so much and make me so uncomfortable? Why can't I just suck it up and be okay? And then there was, why do I struggle so much with friendships? You know, I've never had a big group of friends. It's always been a really small circle of one or two people that I felt comfortable with. And I've always wondered, like, why do I struggle so much with being myself around people and socializing? Honestly, it has always felt like a performance to me, and it has never come naturally to me. And I've never really felt comfortable. You know, I've always wondered, like, why am I not interested in a lot of the things that my peers are interested in? Why is it so hard to relate to them? You know, it's this constant need to mask yourself. And growing up when I was younger, I just felt like no one perceived me correctly. I always felt very misunderstood. And over time, through observation and pattern recognition, I learned how to come across normal and how to interact with people in a way where they feel comfortable. And so it's this constant cycle of performing, of over-perceiving yourself, of overthinking every interaction, and it's exhausting. So, another negative that I've always felt about myself is, why do I struggle so much with that, with relationships? Why can't it come more naturally to me? Why do I always feel like I don't belong? And that feels very isolating, but you tend to blame yourself, right? Because everyone else seems to be getting it right and coping just fine. And it felt like there was some fundamental piece that I was missing and that I just wasn't good at it. And so that's just one other example, but there's so many things in my life where I felt shame for how difficult it was for me to cope. Why can't I handle bright lights and loud noises, and certain smells and certain textures are just unbearable for me? And why are my senses so sensitive? Is something wrong with me? Is something wrong with my health? It's quite distressing to grow up that way and to not have a name for any of it. And what it comes down to is, if you don't have a name for what you're experiencing, then you naturally blame yourself and see it as a shortcoming in yourself, because there's no other explanation for what I'm experiencing. And I think this is a common experience of high masking, late diagnosed autistic people, this shame, this guilt that you just are unable to have the same capacity as everyone else. And so for a very long time, right, that was my perception of myself. And it wasn't all negative. There's many positives about how I viewed myself as well. But I was always aware of these issues, these challenges that I face constantly. And I always felt different. And I don't mean that in a, I'm not like other girls way. I find that form of thinking very toxic, and I despise that rhetoric. I mean in a way of, fundamentally, I am wired differently from everyone else around me, and I don't know why. And then I would rationalize it as, okay, maybe everyone actually feels this way and they're all just performing and hiding it. And maybe I just have to better learn how to cope and seem normal. And that's where masking comes in, right? I learned to mask at a very young age, not intentionally, not consciously. It's just a survival mechanism. And so that's kind of, I guess, the background, the way that I viewed myself before this moment when I was watching this video by Dr. Kim Sage. So as this video is going on, I feel like the world is falling underneath my feet. My brain is just unable to process the information I'm hearing because it is so in contrast of everything that I knew before about myself. Not even in contrast, right? It was explaining everything that I had experienced in my life, all of these traits that didn't have a name. And now suddenly I'm being given a name, autism. And it's something I never, ever had suspected in myself. It's something that was never on my radar. It was incredibly shocking. I don't know how to explain it. I think it's very rare as humans to experience such fundamental paradigm shifts in how you perceive yourself. And it's a very, very intense feeling. But that's what it felt like. It felt like a paradigm shift. It was a fundamental shift in how I perceived myself. And suddenly I'm faced with this realization that everything I had experienced my entire life, my entire identity, sense of identity, a huge portion of it can be explained by me being autistic. And I didn't know that. And that's very, very weird to not have known that about yourself, especially because I'm someone who has always been very contemplative, very reflective and introspective about myself. and highly self-aware. This channel is all about journaling. So, I have journaled my whole life about my experiences, my identity, my sense of self. So it was especially strange for me to realize that the foundation underneath who I am is something that I had no idea about and am completely, was completely unaware of. And so that was the moment, I think, where I experienced the biggest shock in this entire process. And it's interesting, not a lot of people talk about the moment of realization. It's usually like, how did I feel post-diagnosis? Or how did I feel growing up? But I think the point of realization to me was the most impactful, because it's as if I have lived two lives now. There's one life that was pre-realization that I could be autistic, and then there's a whole different version of me now that's post-realization. And I know at the end of the day, I'm still the same person, right? Nothing about me has changed at all. But the realization is everything. The knowledge that explains why I have felt the way I've felt, why I experience the things I experience, that knowledge changes everything. And so I really do view my life now as pre-autism realization and post-autism realization, and I feel like a different person in many ways. And so after that point, I started doing more research. I tried to learn everything I could learn about autism, particularly how it presents in females, high masking females, in late diagnosed females. And I started the process of getting diagnosed. I met with therapists. I had to meet with a psychiatrist who then referred me to an evaluation clinic. And then finally I got evaluated and diagnosed with autism. How I felt during that entire process of realization to diagnosis, that in-between process, was also quite uncomfortable for me because I felt like I was in limbo. I felt untethered, like my understanding of myself is clearly wrong, but I don't know for sure. I'm not 100% certain that I am autistic. At first I didn't feel comfortable self-diagnosing, and then I learned over time that that is also completely valid to diagnose yourself. And that's a whole other issue, the lack of resources, the lack of accessibility to getting diagnoses is so disheartening. But I still, in me, I needed that 100% certainty. I felt this huge sense of imposter syndrome. I was hyper aware that I didn't want to have like confirmation bias, and I wanted to be certain. I wanted to be certain that I was autistic. I needed the label for whatever reason, because otherwise I know myself. I will always be left wondering if I'm wrong. And I think that's another shared experience of a lot of late diagnosed autistic people, is that even when all signs are pointing to, yes, you are autistic, we really struggle with really feeling like we belong in any specific community. I wanted to know for sure that I belong in the autistic community and that I'm not just an imposter or that I'm not performing and I somehow found myself in there. It's really hard to explain. It's a very nuanced thing. But if you are autistic, maybe you understand what I'm saying. So that couple of months where I was waiting and not sure if I was autistic was really difficult, but also a time that I used to just educate myself more. And I really leaned on my journals during that time. I really felt like I experienced so many conflicting feelings, but at the end of the day, I knew I wanted a diagnosis because it comes back to having a name for what I experience. Being able to just have a name is so relieving. And I just remember thinking like that would be the best gift in the world, to just know, to just have a name for everything that I have gone through in my life, everything that I feel, it would make all the difference. It would just feel so validating. And so finally, in March, I had my assessment and I was diagnosed on the spot with autism level 1, which basically means low support needs. And I've had to keep reminding myself that that doesn't mean no support needs. I do need support, and I have always needed support, and I have just never really gotten it. And that is why I have struggled so much, or felt like I was working 10 times harder than my peers to reach the level that I have reached. I wanted to talk a little bit now about all of the feelings I've had post-diagnosis. So the very first thing I felt was relief. It was incredibly validating to hear, with 100% certainty that I am autistic. I finally had an answer. I finally had a name, a label, the validation that I was not just weak or overly sensitive or lazy on days where I couldn't physically function, or socially awkward on occasions where I really struggled with interaction, or that there wasn't something wrong with my health when I found a grocery store too overstimulating and physically painful. All of these things had an explanation now, and that made all the difference. So it was incredibly, incredibly validating, and I really enjoyed that feeling. But what I didn't expect is to feel a lot of negative feelings as well. And I think it's important to be honest about that. I immediately also felt grief. I felt so much grief for my childhood self, my past self, for all of the times where I just felt so lost as a child and so alone. It is innately lonely being autistic because your brain is wired differently from everyone around you, and you are a neurodivergent person trying to survive in a neurotypical world, and the entire world around you is not built for you. And that's very confusing because you see everyone around you coping so well, no one really struggling with that, with the world around them. And meanwhile, internally, you are fighting for your life, it feels like. So I felt a lot of grief for everything I had to go through my entire life and not knowing why. I wished so badly that I could tell myself. I wish I knew sooner. And then came rage. I felt so angry about how inaccessible the world is, how it's not built for disabled people in general, let alone autistic people. I felt rage that there was so much misinformation out there, so many misconceptions, so many stigmas associated with disabilities in general. I felt rage that, the education system failed not only me, but everyone around me when it comes to educating people about different human experiences, different conditions. I just felt so much anger for how the world is set up, and it felt very hopeless. And with that came anxiety. I felt a lot of fear and anxiety around what this means for my future. Should I even be disclosing this to my workplace, or will it lead to discrimination or unconscious biases coming out and me being treated differently, even at a subconscious level? I felt anxious about the direction that this country is going in when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I don't want to get too much into that because that's a whole other topic. And I don't want to bring politics into this, but it is a very, very real fear and consideration. And I felt anxiety about how the people in my life will now perceive me moving forward, and how I was going to share this news with them, how I was going to essentially have to change the way that they treat me in many cases and the way that they support me. And that's really difficult too, because especially with family, you know, they're the people that you're closest to. They know you at your very core. And I can imagine it must be really difficult for them to also have to deal with this paradigm shift, this fundamental change in how they view me as a person. And it's really hard to find that balance of, I don't want them to change how they view me. Like, who I am as a person hasn't changed. I'm still the same me. But I also need them to understand my capacity and the accommodations that I would need and the support that I would need. Navigating that was also really anxiety inducing. Sharing with friends is kind of scary because I don't want my friends to then overthink all of our interactions, or to think that I was just faking it or performing when I was with them. So choosing who to share this with has been really confusing and hard to navigate. So that's, those are a lot of the feelings that I've been having. And I do want to say it's still really early for me. It's only been a couple of weeks since I got diagnosed. And so I'm still processing the information. And I'm sure a lot of the things I'm feeling now will resolve over time. But yeah, it's been a lot of relief and validation, but it's also equally been a lot of grief and anger and anxiety. But I think the one that I want to focus on, the feeling that I want to focus on, is freedom. I feel free. I feel like this diagnosis has given me the permission to be myself. I want to start unmasking. I have been masking my entire life, and it is incredibly exhausting, and it's why I feel exhausted all the time. I experience burnout and just this feeling of being completely drained and like my battery is dead constantly, like way too frequently. And it's been hindering my ability to just function. And now I want to focus on unmasking and being more myself. I just need to be me and give myself the permission to do the things I need to do to feel regulated and to feel comfortable in my environment and to have enough energy every day. And part of that is, getting stim toys and stimming more outwardly. All of my stims previously were quite hidden. I would wiggle my toes in my shoes constantly, and I didn't even realize that is stimming. But, the things that I would do were quite hidden. And now I'm learning to be comfortable with stimming more outwardly, something as small as that. And that's not small, that's actually big. But being myself and not hiding who I am is what I'm trying to focus on now. That has been a very, very positive and empowering and healing aspect of this diagnosis. And so that is kind of the note that I want to end on as well. I know this video was really long, and if you're one of my usual subscribers and viewers, I just want to thank you so much for hearing my story and being here and being a part of this community that feels very safe and accepting and comfortable to me, because I've not had many spaces like that in my life. It means the world to me. And if you are someone who is autistic or suspects you are or is in the process of getting diagnosed, I hope that this video made you feel a little less alone and validated in how you're feeling. And I just wish you the very best. I hope that you are able to be comfortable in your skin and have safe spaces for yourself and people in your life who love and support you. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about my experiences more if that is of interest to anyone watching. I hope to eventually have a Q&A on my channel, maybe when I reach 5,000 subscribers. But I'm really happy that I shared this with you all today. It is very nerve-wracking and scary, but ultimately, I think it was the right decision, and I would just like to ask that you please keep the comments respectful and kind, because I really do want this to be a space where everyone feels loved and accepted and safe. So with that, thank you so much. I hope to see you in the next video. And happy National Autism Acceptance Month.